Hello and welcome to Politics here on France 24. Bye-bye, Nicolas Sarkozy. Hello, FrancoisHollande. We have a socialist president for the second time under the Fifth Republic. He was elected last Sunday, 51.6% of the votes. But while François Hollande won the mother of all French political battle, he has not yet won the war. Both the socialists and the conservatives are already gearing up for the crucial June 10th and June 17th legislative elections. Those elections will indeed probably shape the Hollande presidency. They will tell whether he will have a majority to implement his platform or whether he will have to deal with maybe a hostile government and parliamentary majority. So to draw the lessons of the presidential election and look ahead, with me on the set, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, who is a columnist with the Sunday Telegraph, Gregory Viscusi with Bloomberg News, and Dave Clark, who is the deputy bureau chief of the Agence France-Presse here in Paris. Before we bring them in, we'll just go back to Sunday night. Well, actually, it was already early Monday morning when François Hollande addressed the tens of thousands of people who had gathered on the Place de la Bastille. Place de la Bastille is a symbolic place for the French left. It is there where they celebrated back in 1981 when another François, Mitterrand, became the first socialist to be elected.
I want to tell you how emotional it is for me to be the person that represents you. To be the person in whom you have entrusted the responsibility of the country. I also want to tell you how proud I am to be the President of the Republic, of all of its citizens. How proud I am of this France you represent, this France of diversity, of unity, gathered together.
Unity, unity, unity. I want to be the president of all the French. Classic discourse, I would say, but clearly in the mind of François Hollande, he wants already to show that he's a different president than the outgoing one.
Well, I would say that it's his nature. We saw as chairman of the Socialist Party that he was for 10 years somebody who liked compromise and who liked to bring people together, and very rare, especially in the Socialist Party, but in general in French politics, he was not the type to bear a grudge. And he was capable to build an alliance with somebody with whom he'd had a fight before. So all of this, I think he will bring to the core. I would say that his partisans are not exactly in the same mood. They booed Nicolas Sarkozy's name, even when Sarkozy made a fairly elegant concession speech. And they were sort of celebrating in Paris with the idea that France would be rid of somebody they hated. So in many ways, it's a good move from François Hollande, and Nicolas Sarkozy answered that the following day, the following Tuesday, when he invited the president-elect to join him to celebrate the VE Day ceremonies in Paris. It is not something that usually takes place, but in this instance, Sarkozy decided it was nice to have both presidents in the same place.
Viscusi, did you feel that after a feisty campaign, we had a feisty debate between both men, both maybe felt the need to take a breather and say, okay, let's let bygones be bygones. Now we should maybe try to strike a different note.
Yeah, I think the nastiness of Sarkozy at the end of the campaign was probably more of desperation, and that he was just trying everything to pull back in the polls. And he gave a very dignified speech, as you said, and you sometimes wonder maybe if he'd been that way throughout the campaign, he might still be president. I know that's Monday morning quarterbacking, but
that's what we're here for.
That's what we're here for. And, it's hard to know which is the real Sarkozy.
Well, his own party now has to decide which is the real UMP. Did they lose because they turned off centrists with this string to harder right-wing rhetoric in the last 2 weeks of the campaign? Or did they, if they'd started that earlier, would they maybe have squeezed through? And there are two factions at least, probably more than two factions in the UMP and in the French right more generally. We'll have to decide. And they'll have to also keep their infighting under wraps a bit better than they've done so far before the legislative elections, if they're going to hope to share any power. If it's not a good showing for the right in these June elections, the Senate has already fallen to the left. They've got the presidency, and now the legislatives are coming up. This could be a clean sweep for the left. And France isn't a country that's generally governed from the left. It will be admittedly fairly centre left at the core of this government. It'll be interesting to see what happens in June. The UMP is going to have to keep it together between now and then. There's already things in the camp enchaîné this morning. The fighting between the former Prime Minister, outgoing Prime Minister François Fillon, and the head of the party, Sarkozy. So we'll see who gets to lead what remains of the party and where Mr. Sarkozy goes next.
Exactly. One thing they will not have is Nicolas Sarkozy, who said privately or to his party faithful that he would quit politics, and this is what he told the French in what might be his last public words on Sunday night.
After 35 years in politics, my role will no longer be the same. My commitment to France will be different from now on.
Should we trust him?
Well, I think he's shrewd enough to realize that if he ever wants to become a grand old man of politics at one stage, he has to keep away from the stage for some time.
And he's only 57.
And he's only 57. He's got plenty of time. So it's going to be interesting to see, because there have been gossip that he said, "Oh, I'll go and work in the private sector
Make money."
And make money, which he hasn't actually. He's the president of the Fifth Republic, who is declaring his income, who's got the lowest income of all of them, except possibly de Gaulle, but all the others were richer than he is. So everybody accused President Bling Bling, but not quite, with the results that people expected. But I would say that he certainly probably will be tempted to do a bit what Tony Blair did and have some sort of private consultancy business, either like Blair or like Kissinger with Kissinger Associates, and at the same time, so it could be advise government, advise crisis advice consultancy, and probably he will still take a great deal of interest in European affairs, and it's perfectly possible that he might have a political career at some stage on the European stage. We don't know yet.
You don't think that French politics is in his blood?
I think he's always been fascinated by the world of business and money, so I think he probably will give it a try. I mean, whether he stays in it, whether in a few years he's tempted to come back, but he truly is fascinated by business. You see him if you go on a visit with him to factories or to visit companies.
And you followed him quite a bit.
He's totally into it. He likes businessmen. He's always had good friends among businessmen. He's had to sort of scale that back a bit for campaign reasons, because he got in trouble early on in his presidency by being too close to some businessmen, as we know. So I think he will give it a try. Yeah, I think we could see him in some sort. I don't know. I can't tell you exactly what, but whether it's country chairman for some bank, he'll have to improve his English. But I think we will see him in private business.
Do you think he's taking a risk? Although he said, I didn't want to exit the stage brutally, like, for instance, former socialist leader Lionel Jospin, after being eliminated in 2002 from the first round of the presidential election, who quit abruptly. Nevertheless, the fact that he's leaving and he was the clear leader of his party, isn't there a risk that he's just going to behead the party and have lots of infighting?
Well, I mean, as that soundbite you played showed, he didn't say jamais. He didn't say adieu.
Well, apparently he was supposed to say it, and he struck it out.
For some reason, the draft that he was read out was a little bit more equivocal. It was obviously a farewell for now. It was obviously, don't count on me to be out next week campaigning strongly for these legislative elections. But it wasn't, that's it. I'm taking my ball. I'm going off to Wall Street. He is. He still has. The people in that meeting still cheered him. Many were in tears that he lost. He's still got a hardcore support in this country. If he does want to come back to politics one day, I don't think that'll be excluded to him.
And there are also maybe legal troubles ahead for him.
Well, then yes, but Jacques Chirac has the highest popularity rating of any former or current French leader, and he's a convicted criminal. So I don't think the fact that he's being investigated on several fronts will count for very much in France.
The legislative elections probably will be key to determine how President Hollande will behave, because he has already said, the socialists said, we need a majority, because right now the outgoing parliament has a right-wing majority. How do you see this playing out? Do you think the polls are rather close? I mean, it's not certain the socialists will have a clear majority.
The waters are muddied by the Front National. Marine Le Pen has said that she would not support the Sarkozyist and the right-wing current majority in the legislative elections. The French system is a two-round system, but it's not in the legislative elections. It's not like in the presidential election in which you have the first two past the post in the second round. If you poll more than 12.5% of the vote in the first round, you can keep and spoil the election for whoever doesn't really look like you on the other side. So it's very likely that the Front National will have lots of candidates in places who will poll more than 12.5%. And then they will spoil the election probably for the right, and they will not mind helping elect somebody on the left because it is Marine Le Pen's strategy. If the current democratic right is successful, then she has no part to play in this country. She is marginalized. But if the left comes to power, it's going to be exactly unlike under Mitterrand. The National Front will flourish. So her tactic is actually to help elect left-wingers.
So the socialists are in good shape because of that.
I think it's pretty clear that the socialists and their allies will have a majority in parliament. If you look at the polls, quite clear. I think the risk for Hollande is that probably the Socialist Party on its own may not have the majority, which means that he's going to govern with all the Front de Gauche, the people the Mélenchon and the Communist back people, which means that Hollande, who himself is an extremely moderate, I mean, whether you even call him a socialist, I'm not sure. He's quite moderate. He will rely on votes for people on the left who are not moderate, and will be pushing for some sort of more hard left policy. I think that's the risk, that the left could do too well, but that his partners are going to be people who are going to be pushing him to go further than he may want to go on some issues.
I want to turn now to François Hollande. Well, he's going to officially become president on May 15th. And he has obviously lots of meetings in Berlin, in the United States, but there are also some immediate measures he will want to take, and he probably realizes that what you do at the onset is very important. So he said, lowering the age of retirement back to 60, maybe blockading the price of gasoline, things like that. I mean,
the very first thing he's going to do is to go to Berlin and find out how much money he has to spend. And all elections risk disappointing people these days, and it's always been the case that politicians overpromise during election campaigns and end up disappointing. But especially now in Europe, especially given the institutional situation of a lot of the powers being already devolved to Brussels, but also the economic situation of a lot of the powers effectively being devolved to the bond markets because of the size of the deficits and the debts these countries have been running. His first task will be to find some kind of modus operandi with the Bundesbank to find out how much of his programme he's actually going to be able to put into practice at all, even before we decide how many of the Mélenchonites he's got in his own majority. So his first meeting with Angela Merkel is going to be very important. And it's not going to be as difficult as we once thought it might be, because she's facing a challenge on her own front. She's lost Schleswig-Holstein to the socialists over there, so she knows that there's an anti-austerity push coming in Europe now, and she'll have to find some way, find some compromise herself between her instinct and the Bundesbank's instinct to keep things tight on the inflation front. But no government in Europe anymore can just have its own policy. There has to be some kind of accommodation made with Brussels.
I don't think that Merkel's going to be the real problem. I think Merkel and Hollande can work things out. They're both quite reasonable. I think Greece is going to be the problem. The Greek situation is getting worse and worse. It's imploding, and that's going to be he's going to find himself very soon in these midnight meetings in Brussels with his fellow heads of government trying to work out a solution for Greece, and that's going to put him on the spot a bit about how sincere he is about these things. Because he can't he can't break European unity by sort of letting Greece off the hook. On the other hand, it's going to be a bit hypocritical for him to start reading the riot act to Greece when he's been preaching, no austerity to France, which hasn't been through anything like the austerity that Greece has been through. So I think any honeymoon is going to be ruined by Greece very quickly.
We know that he has a game plan, and the game plan is to have the Cour des Comptes, the French official body of accounts, which incidentally he's a member of as a civil servant, audit the accounts of the country, and surprise, they will come back and say the situation is dire. It's a lot direr than we think, and therefore there are lots of reforms that have to be deferred. Deferred being code for, whenever we have the time in the next century. And he will have to do that.
So he can come up and say the coffers are even more empty than I thought.
Which actually, they certainly are more empty than he said during the campaign. So that will be perfectly accurate. And then he's got around him a bunch of very capable technocrats who basically are, if not the same, exactly similar to the ones who were around Nicolas Sarkozy. And they will go on applying largely the same policies with a few cosmetic measures like the sort of higher tax rate for the better off. I don't think he can get away with the 75% taxation on income above 1 million euros a year, because the Council of State has already, the Constitutional Council has already made signs that this would be confiscatory, and that is not acceptable for French legislation. But certainly the top tax band will go up 5%, and there will be other measures that will sort of look good to his voters, but I don't think he's got much margin of maneuver.
So Hollande would be similar to Sarkozy in substance, different in style. Possibly,
but Sarkozy had at his side François Fillon, the former outgoing prime minister, who said very early on in Sarkozy campaign, we're bankrupt, we don't have any money. And at the time he was hushed up because people didn't want to hear that. But now I think people have realised broadly that there isn't not a lot of money kicking around.
The President Hollande said, I'm sorry, folks, we're bankrupt.
He'll do exactly what Sarkozy's done for 5 years, it's just to blame his predecessors for all his problems. I mean, Sarkozy blames everything.
This works for 6 months, but after a while
Sarkozy tried it for 5 years. He's still blaming the 35 hours for everything that went wrong under his...
Well, he was also blaming the crisis.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
To be fair, the crisis actually does exist. If you believe that the crisis, the international crisis exists,
no, and
I'm
sure that between the Cour des Comptes, between Merkel, Bundesbank, Mario Monti, Mario Draghi, I mean, there's just not the Marios. There's just, I think everyone will be reading along the message that there just isn't the money to play with, and he'll just have to find that way to present that truth to the French. I think he knows it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't,
But once Sarkozy has failed, and then Hollande fails, then the next election, it looks like Greece. It's once all your centre-ground politicians have failed to cope with this, then people start looking for...
And that's why the next parliament is key, because if he's relying on support for the far left in parliament, then it's going to be a lot harder for him to sell that than it would if it was just a socialist party.
Okay, well, still lots of suspense ahead. No honeymoon for François Hollande. I think we all agree on this. Thank you for watching this edition of Politics here on France 24.